Have you ever felt like you're living on autopilot, as if your life is just a sequence of days, weeks, and months passing by without you truly experiencing them? The scariest part is that this isn't happening by chance. There's an entire system designed to keep you exactly where you are, trapped in mediocrity. Carl Jung once said, "As long as man lives like a herd animal, he will have no individual psyche." In other words, as long as you follow the crowd, your ideas, your choices, and even your emotions won't truly be your own. But do we even have a choice? We live in a world that preaches progress, but in reality, rewards conformity. From an early age, we're taught to follow rules, obey standards, and never question. School doesn't teach us how to think. It teaches us how to memorize. Work doesn't value creativity. It values obedience. And when someone dares to break free from this system, they're ridiculed, ignored, or even attacked. Friedrich Nietzsche called this the pride of the mediocre, the tendency of the masses to persecute those who dare to stand out. Anyone who tries to elevate themselves intellectually, emotionally, or morally is seen as a threat. And so, little by little, mediocrity becomes the norm. But there is a way out, and that's exactly what we're going to explore in this video. We'll uncover how modern society pushes us toward mediocrity, and more importantly, how to break free from this cycle and reclaim our true potential. Modern society loves the word progress. We hear it all the time. We're evolving, growing, innovating. But if that were true, why do so many people feel stuck, stagnant, and worst of all, empty? The reality is that so-called progress is not necessarily our progress. While technology advances and productivity increases, most people feel like their lives are stuck. We work more and more, consume more, rush from one commitment to another, yet it never seems to be enough. Hermann Hesse, author of Siddhartha, once said, "Reality is the thing we should worry about the least because it is already there, painfully and constantly." What did he mean? That while we are obsessed with money, careers, status, and obligations, we forget what truly matters, inner growth, the meaning of life, and what makes us genuinely human. And this distraction is no coincidence. From an early age, we are trained not to question. The education system teaches us to memorize answers, not to seek questions. The workplace rewards those who follow orders, not those who challenge norms. The media bombards us with superficial information and convinces us that instant entertainment is more important than deep reflection. Stephen James Bartlett, in his book Normality Does Not Equal Mental Health, states that mediocrity is not just a state, but a degenerative psychological condition. This means that living on autopilot not only leaves us dissatisfied, but also makes us incapable of seeing an alternative. Many of us grow up believing that success is tied to a thriving career, a good salary, and a comfortable lifestyle. But what happens when we finally achieve all of that and still feel empty? The truth is that none of it fulfills us because we are not just material beings. We are also emotional, intellectual, and spiritual beings. And if we neglect these aspects, we end up falling into one of the greatest illnesses of modern times, acedia. Acedia was described by medieval thinkers as a state of soul weariness, a deep apathy where everything seems dull, colorless, and purposeless. Today, this same condition has been rebranded as burnout, depression, or chronic anxiety. But the problem remains the same. We are disconnected from what truly matters. And why do we feel so trapped? Because modern society does not want you to think, to question, or to rise above. Carl Jung warned that society promotes mediocrity because it rewards those who conform and punishes those who try to stand out. This happens because an individual who questions too much becomes autonomous and seeks a higher purpose is unpredictable and difficult to control. What the system wants are people who produce without questioning, consume without thinking, and distract themselves without seeking meaning. And the worst part? It becomes a vicious cycle. The emptier we feel, the more we seek superficial distractions, the further we drift from what truly matters, and in the end, the more stagnant we become. But there is a way out, and the first step to escaping this trap is realizing that it exists. Society doesn't just push us toward mediocrity, it turns it into a standard of living, a mold that everyone must fit into. From an early age, we are trained to follow invisible rules, to avoid conflict, to shape ourselves into what is considered normal. The problem is that this normal often means being a predictable, passive, and easily manipulated individual. The system doesn't want thinkers. It wants operators. It doesn't want autonomous individuals. It wants replaceable parts in a larger machine. From the very first day of school, we learn that questioning is dangerous. Traditional education doesn't encourage doubt. It encourages memorization. We are trained to absorb information, not to analyze it. Creativity is stifled and curiosity is replaced by a subtle fear of making mistakes. We grow up believing that failure is something to be avoided when, in reality, it is the only true path to growth. Stephen James Bartlett argues that mediocrity is not just a state, but a psychological disease that limits our potential. Mediocrity doesn't arise by chance. It is the result of conditioning that prevents us from developing authentic thought. The workplace reinforces this conditioning. Most people find themselves in jobs where there is little room for autonomy or real innovation. Meritocracy, often praised, is frequently an illusion. The ones who rise are not necessarily the most capable, but those who best adapt to the game. Society teaches us that obedience is a virtue, that success is about fitting into an existing system rather than creating something new. Little by little, we learn to ignore our own ideas and follow orders without question. Carl Jung warned that society rewards those who conform and punishes those who dare to stand out. This is not just a metaphor. History is full of examples of people who were ridiculed, attacked, or even destroyed because they dared to challenge the status quo. Those who seek to elevate themselves intellectually, emotionally, or morally become a threat. Mediocrity doesn't just survive, it protects itself by marginalizing those who attempt to escape it. This becomes even clearer in the world of social media. We have never had so much access to information, yet at the same time, we have never been so misinformed. Algorithms don't promote reflection, they promote impulsivity. What drives engagement is not depth, but polarization. Critical thinking is replaced by instant reactions, shallow opinions, and a culture where appearance matters more than substance. Bartlett describes mediocrity as a kind of spiritual poverty in which people live one-dimensionally, incapable of seeing beyond the surface. Spanish philosopher José Ortega y Gasset, in The Revolt of the Masses, described this phenomenon clearly. The modern individual does not want to stand out, but to dissolve into the crowd. He finds comfort in doing what everyone else does, thinking what everyone else thinks, and living as everyone else lives. And this behavior is constantly reinforced. Questioning too much is seen as arrogance, striving for growth is interpreted as selfish ambition, and having independent thought is considered dangerous. The pressure to conform is not just social, but emotional. We are trained to seek approval, to avoid confrontation, to escape the pain of rejection. This creates a paradox. Most people want to be different, want to be unique, but at the same time, they fear standing out. This fear leads many to choose a mediocre path, not because they want to, but because they believe it is the only safe option. Bartlett explains that mediocrity acts like an invisible prison because those trapped inside it don't realize they are imprisoned. And the longer someone stays in this state, the harder it becomes to escape. Mediocrity doesn't just confine us, it reprograms us. After years of following orders, avoiding risks, and suppressing our individuality, we start believing that this is our true self. We forget who we could have been if we had followed our own instincts, our own passions. And when we see someone who still dares to be different, we feel envy or discomfort, because that person reminds us of what we left behind. Society has created a system that rewards those who fit in and discourages those who want more. Schools teach conformity. Jobs demand obedience. Social media promotes superficiality. Everything pushes in the same direction. The result? A society where human potential is stifled, where mediocrity becomes comfortable, and where few dare to challenge this order. But is there still a way to escape? If the system molds mediocrity and punishes difference, what is the real price of trying to be different? If there is one thing modern society does not forgive, it is the attempt to be different. It does not matter if this difference comes from a more critical way of thinking, a more autonomous behavior, or a genuine search for something greater. The mere act of wanting to stand out from the herd is enough to attract resistance, distrust, and often hostility. This is not just a characteristic of our time. Friedrich Nietzsche called this phenomenon the pride of mediocrity. The masses need to protect themselves by attacking those who attempt to rise above them. The problem with mediocrity is not just that it exists, but that it protects itself. There is a silent pact among conformists. Anyone who dares to break the pattern is seen as a threat. Modern society reinforces this dynamic in a subtle yet highly effective way. Schools, workplaces, and social media all have mechanisms to remind those who dare to be different that they are not welcome. The persecution of excellence is nothing new. Nobel Prize winner Charles Richet once warned, "The more the masses are stupid and mediocre, the more they ruthlessly persecute those who try to diminish their mediocrity." This behavior has been evident throughout history, but today it manifests in even more sophisticated ways. The attack on individuality begins early. In school, The curious child who asks too many questions quickly realizes that this makes them a target of impatience from teachers and often mockery from classmates. At work, the professional who dares to suggest something new finds that their boldness is interpreted as arrogance or insubordination. On social media, any idea that deviates from the consensus is swiftly met with irony or hatred. The fear of ridicule becomes a powerful tool of control. Carl Jung described this as the great tragedy of modern society. Society, by rewarding collective qualities, inevitably pushes individuality against the wall. The problem is that without individuals who think for themselves, without those who challenge norms, there is no real progress. There is no innovation, no growth, no evolution. The culture of conformity also creates a psychological trap. Those who dare to be different not only face external resistance but must also deal with the internal fear of exclusion. As Jung stated, the fear of ridicule is the prison of mediocrity. This prison is so effective that many people would rather abandon their own ideas and talents than risk rejection. Stephen James Bartlett describes this as a cycle of self-sabotage. Mediocre people don't just conform, they go a step further, justifying their mediocrity as if it were a conscious choice. Instead of admitting that they have given up something valuable, they convince themselves that conformity is the right path. This creates a mindset in which anyone who tries to rise above mediocrity is seen as pretentious or naive. Sociologist José Ortega y Gasset, in The Revolt of the Masses, pointed out this phenomenon in a brutal way. The mediocre person does not wish to learn or grow. He wants everyone to become like him so that his own lack of effort is never questioned. This is the real danger of mediocrity. It is not content to simply exist. It must become the norm. And when someone breaks free, society does not forget. The individual who tries to rise must be prepared to face resistance not only from others but from the very system itself. The modern world is designed to make life easier for those who conform and more difficult for those who challenge the status quo. The path to excellence is lonely, requires sacrifices, and often comes at a high emotional cost. The problem is that many, upon realizing this cost, give up. The fear of being alone, of being rejected, of being criticized is too strong. Few can sustain their individuality under such immense pressure. As Émile Cioran stated, a man who fears ridicule will never go far. He is doomed to mediocrity even if he has genius within him. But what about those who manage to overcome this barrier? What happens when someone decides they will no longer accept mediocrity as their destiny? Mediocrity creeps in stealthily, but what sustains it is something even more dangerous: fear. Fear of being judged, fear of failing, fear of standing out and being excluded. The system that pushes us toward conformity feeds on this fear, making the comfort zone seem like a safe place when, in reality, it is a prison. The good news is that, despite social pressure and lifelong conditioning, there is a way out. But this way out is not comfortable. It requires courage, effort, and above all, a conscious choice. The first step to escaping mediocrity is becoming aware of it. As Carl Jung stated, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The problem is that many people live without realizing they are trapped in this cycle. They believe their choices are autonomous when, in fact, they have been shaped by a system that encourages them to follow a predictable and limited path. True freedom begins when you start recognizing these influences and questioning them. The second step is overcoming the fear of judgment. The need for acceptance is one of the most powerful forces keeping us within imposed standards. As Friedrich Nietzsche pointed out, the individual has to pay a high price to become themselves, and that price is often the initial loneliness of breaking away from what is expected. Those who stand out, who become independent, inevitably disturb those who have chosen complacency. This generates resistance, criticism, and even persecution. But the alternative, conforming to be accepted, comes at an even greater cost, abandoning your true essence. To escape mediocrity, one must commit to a higher ideal. Carl Jung said that the importance of an ideal does not lie in its achievement, but in the direction it gives to life. When an individual pursues something meaningful, whether it be knowledge, art, wisdom, or any form of excellence, they transcend mediocrity because they stop living solely for themselves. The meaning of life is not found in accumulating things, but in connecting with something greater. Without this, emptiness sets in and mediocrity becomes inevitable. Another essential point is developing intellectual autonomy. José Ortega y Gasset argued that the mediocre person avoids thinking for themselves because it requires effort and often leads to discomfort. To escape this fate, one must cultivate critical thinking. This means not accepting ready-made ideas, questioning dominant narratives, and being willing to confront uncomfortable truths. Reading, philosophy, art, and engaging with questioning minds are powerful tools for breaking free from the mental conditioning imposed by society. But escaping mediocrity is not just an intellectual exercise, it is an emotional and moral process. Emotional mediocrity manifests when a person becomes incapable of finding satisfaction within themselves and starts relying on constant external stimulation. Anyone who wants to break free from this cycle must learn to cultivate a rich inner world where boredom is not an enemy, but a space for reflection. Great philosophers like Schopenhauer argued that the ability to endure solitude and find pleasure in introspection is one of the most defining traits of superior individuals. Moral mediocrity, on the other hand, is the hardest to overcome. A morally mediocre individual lacks the courage to stand by their convictions when they go against the tide. They hide behind collective opinion because it feels safer. To escape this trap, one must develop an unshakable sense of integrity, being able to uphold a truth even when everyone around prefers to ignore it. As Nietzsche once said, integrity is the greatest of virtues because it accepts no compromises. Ultimately, escaping mediocrity means taking action. It is not enough to recognize the problem and reflect on it. Concrete decisions must be made to break away from conformity. This may mean changing one's social circle, abandoning destructive habits, seeking new intellectual and emotional challenges, or even starting over in an entirely new direction. The path is not easy, but it is the only one that leads to an authentic life. Mediocrity is comfortable, but sterile. The effort to escape it is arduous, but liberating. The final choice is always yours. To live within the limits imposed by the system, or to dare to seek something greater. What do you choose? Modern society offers us a comfortable, predictable, and safe path. But this path comes at a steep price. It demands that we abandon our individuality, our curiosity, and our courage. Mediocrity is not just a state of mind, but a condition imposed by a system that does not want autonomous individuals. It wants easily replaceable parts. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." Mediocrity is the state of those who never question themselves, who live on autopilot, following what the majority does without asking why. Awakening happens when we become aware of this invisible prison and decide to break free from it, even if it means facing resistance and solitude. The problem is that most people don't want to pay the price of freedom. Friedrich Nietzsche called this comfortable slavery, the human tendency to prefer a predictable, challenge-free life over an uncertain yet authentic existence. Escaping mediocrity means abandoning this illusion of security and embracing risk, doubt, and the responsibility of creating our own path. The great paradox of modern life is that we have more access to information than ever, yet we have become more superficial. We have more technology, yet less time to think. We have more connections, yet fewer real bonds. And in the midst of this chaos, mediocrity establishes itself as the norm. The system doesn't need to force anyone to be mediocre. It simply offers enough distraction so that we never realize we are wasting our lives. But now you know the truth. The question is, what will you do with it? You can ignore this reflection and go back to your routine as if nothing happened, or you can make the decision to question, to learn, to evolve, and to seek a real purpose. You can choose to be just another one among the masses, or you can decide to be the exception. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Mediocrity prevents us from living that privilege, but if we have the courage, we can break this cycle and reclaim what truly makes us human, the pursuit of growth, meaning, and greatness. The final choice will always be yours. If you've made it this far, congratulations. Very few people have the patience, curiosity, and courage to engage in such deep reflection. Most give up halfway, not because they can't understand, but because they don't want to. The very fact that you're here means you're already different. You've started to break free from mediocrity because you chose to reflect instead of just consuming passively. You are part of the minority that dares to question, and that alone is a huge step forward. I know that the path to an authentic life isn't easy. Many times you'll feel alone. You'll realize that few people truly want to grow. You'll feel the pressure to return to the herd. But remember, the greatest minds in history also faced this resistance. Nietzsche, Jung, Ortega, y Gasset, Cioran, they all understood the price of thinking differently. So if this video made you reflect, share this idea. Question the truths that were imposed on you. Seek knowledge, choose to grow. Because in the end, the only thing worse than mediocrity is going through life without ever trying to escape it. And if you want to continue this journey with me, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and let me know in the comments. Do you think modern society really pushes us toward mediocrity, or is that just a myth? Let's keep this conversation going and build a community of people who refuse to be just another face in the crowd. Now, if you want to dive even deeper into this topic, click on the video appearing on the screen about how Nietzsche's philosophy can free you from conformity. Or if you prefer, watch this other video where we explore Carl Jung's view on modern society and the search for self-knowledge. See you in the next video, and remember, thinking may be uncomfortable, but it's the only way to be truly free.